I've never really understood why people make such a big deal about emotions. They cry over spilled milk, scream when someone cuts them off in traffic, and laugh at jokes that aren't even funny. It's always seemed to me like they're wasting a lot of energy over nothing. I don't feel things the way other people do. And if you think that makes me a monster, well, that's your problem, not mine. January was the beginning of my most interesting year yet. I'd moved to a new town, somewhere small and forgettable, the kind of place where people notice you if you're not careful. That's what I wanted, to blend in. Not that I had anything to hide, of course. I've always been careful, always smart. But I find it easier when people don't ask questions. I rented a house on a quiet street, the kind with neat little lawns and old trees that creak in the wind. It was perfect. The neighbors were a mix of old and young families, the kind of people who wave and smile as they pass, but don't actually care enough to get to know you. I liked it that way. By February, I had settled in. There was a girl at the grocery store who always smiled at me when I came in. Jessica. She was pretty, in a simple way, with blonde hair that curled around her face like a doll's. I could tell she was interested in me. They always are. So, I smiled back. Gave her a little attention. People like Jessica are easy to manipulate. They crave attention, approval. All I had to do was ask her to grab a coffee after her shift, and she was hooked. By March, we were dating, though that word didn't mean much to me. Jessica thought we were something special, of course. She told me I was different, that I understood her in a way no one else did. She shared her secrets with me, her fears, her insecurities. It was almost laughable how easily she opened up, like a diary waiting to be read. I never shared much about myself. Didn't have to. People like Jessica fill the silence with their own noise. They assume that if you listen, really listen, you must care. I didn't. But she never noticed. April brought with it a new challenge. A guy at work, Tim, started to pay a little too much attention to me. He was one of those overly friendly types, the kind who wants to go out for drinks after work and ask you about your weekend plans. I could see the way he looked at me, with those curious eyes, like he thought he could figure me out. That wasn't going to happen. People like Tim need to be handled delicately. If you push too hard, they'll get suspicious, and if you don't push at all, they'll think you're weak. So, I started working on him. A little casual conversation here, a shared joke there. I let him think we were becoming friends. By May, he was telling me about his problems at home, his wife, his kids, his regrets about his career. He didn't realize that he was giving me ammunition. People are always so eager to unload their baggage onto someone else, never considering how it could be used against them. It didn't take long before I started planting seeds. Subtle, at first. Comments about how tough it must be to balance work and family life. How his wife didn't seem to appreciate him. How he deserved better. By June, Tim was miserable, exactly where I wanted him. I watched him unravel, his performance at work slipping, his temper flaring. He was drinking more, staying late at the office. I could tell his marriage was on the rocks, and it wasn't long before he came to me, desperate for advice. I gave it to him, of course, but only what would push him further toward the edge. July was when things got messy. Jessica had started to become clingy. She was talking about the future, making plans. She even mentioned moving in together. That wasn't part of my plan. I could feel her digging in, becoming a complication I didn't need. The problem with people like Jessica is that they don't understand when it's over. They get emotional, irrational. They cry, they beg. It's pathetic, really. So, I ended it. Quickly, cleanly. I told her we wanted different things, that it wasn't working out. She didn't take it well, of course. Cried, shouted, accused me of using her. In a way, she was right, but I wasn't going to tell her that. By August, she was out of my life, though she left a few voicemails, pathetic attempts to rekindle what we'd never really had. I deleted them without listening. September brought a new opportunity. A woman at work, Catherine. She was older than me, a widow with a sizable inheritance, though she tried to keep it quiet. People like Catherine think their money gives them power, makes them untouchable. But wealth can also be a vulnerability, especially when you know how to exploit it. I started spending more time with her, making her feel important, like I valued her opinion. It didn't take long before she started confiding in me, sharing her fears about aging, loneliness, the pressure to manage her late husband's estate. By October, I had her wrapped around my finger. She invited me to dinner at her house, introduced me to her friends. They were all like her, old money, full of pretension and empty chatter. I played my part perfectly, smiling and nodding in all the right places, giving just enough of myself to keep them interested without revealing anything real. November was when things took a turn. Tim, the guy from work, finally cracked. His wife left him, took the kids, and he spiraled out of control. He stopped showing up at work, started drinking heavily. I heard he was talking about me to a few people, blaming me for his problems, saying I'd manipulated him. He wasn't wrong, but I couldn't let that get out. I made sure to visit him, offer my support. I told him I was there for him, that we'd get through this together. It wasn't long before he was leaning on me more than ever, grateful for my help. He didn't realize that I was only helping him dig his own grave. December came, and I could feel the year winding down. Catherine had grown more dependent on me, to the point where she was asking for my advice on her finances. Tim, on the other hand, was a shell of his former self, barely functioning. Jessica was a distant memory, her name hardly crossing my mind. I stood at the edge of the year, looking back at the chaos I had orchestrated, the lives I had quietly dismantled. It had been a productive year, all things considered. People always think they know what's going on. They think they can read you, figure you out. But they don't see the strings being pulled, the subtle manipulations that guide their actions. They don't realize that everything they do is just part of a bigger game. And I always win the game. The thing is, I don't feel guilt. I don't feel remorse. People are tools, stepping stones. They're too busy worrying about their own little lives to see the bigger picture. And I'm the one painting it. Next year will be even better. I've learned a lot this year, sharpened my skills, refined my methods. There's always room for improvement, after all. But one thing remains the same, I don't feel things the way they do. I never will. And that's my greatest advantage.